I forgot to leave some keys in my office that someone needs to grab. I'll be right back. But if you don't have the residential purchase agreement already pulled up and you have the capability of pulling it up, I would recommend doing so that you can follow along. For those of you at home, I will be screen sharing a copy of the residential purchase agreement. I'll be right back. Give me just a second. Let me put these keys in my office.
Hello. Hello. On card. Card? Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Is this it?
Yeah. I think it's like actions.
My good.
Oh, so cute.
I'll look at you today.
Zip form edition?
Yeah. So
I just went to
basically there are some
the transactions on standard forms.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Oh, no. It is the form. The form edition. Access the free one. Okay.
You doing part one or part?
We're going to do part one. Yeah, we're going to do part one. All right, so those of you at home, just keep in mind that because I do screen share, I don't monitor the chat box. Please feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me if you have any questions. If we're discussing something and you have a question about that section, wait until we're finished with that section. I very well may answer your question. If you have a question that's not in relation to that section, very likely I'm covering it in the contract, but wait till the end of class. I will ask if anyone has any questions, just jot that question down real quick so we can stay on track. All right. And just so you know, if you're in the mentorship program, there's an activity associated with this. It should be performed with your mentor. You may not want to perform it with your mentor if this is the first time you're taking residential purchase agreement class. You may want to take it twice. And remember, it's a part one and part two. My classes are recorded and they're on YouTube. If you just search my name, usually within a day or two, there is a previous version of RPA already up on YouTube. Only take the versions from this year. But I would recommend taking the class at least twice before you practice writing an RPA with your mentor. You'll get much more out of it. If you haven't done so, just so you know, there is some pre-homework. If I'm teaching something like residential purchase agreement, you should go ahead and take a look at a residential purchase agreement and read through it in its entirety. The mentorship program that I have kind of revamped is complete. So I'll be posting a copy of the new mentorship program outline, including the class schedule on the outside of both sides of the training room door. And if you'd like a copy, you're welcome to email me and I'll send that to you directly, okay? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started unless anyone has any questions before we start. Yeah.
Is it, sorry, I do.
Yeah, go for it.
Residential purchase agreement 1222, is that the one?
Let's see.
Yeah. It works for me too.
Yes. Sure. All right, can everyone at home see disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so every time you write a contract as a real estate agent, there will be disclosures that automatically accompany it. You do not have to add them. The reason that the state has included them is because they're required with every contract, okay? It doesn't matter, like if you're writing multiple offers for the same buyer, you will still have to have each one of these disclosures that accompanies the residential purchase agreement every single time, all right? But again, they're automatically included, so you don't have to think about it. So the very first one is disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. This has to do with what your duties are, what your obligations are, and your agency relationship with your client, okay? In the case that you are representing either seller or buyer, or providing dual representation. Guys, can anyone tell me what dual representation is?
But yes, we have to decide.
But a lot of people think dual representation is when an individual agent represents both buyer and seller, and that is correct. However, it also means any two agents from the same brokerage. Okay, so if I have a listing and any one of you write on it, that is technically dual representation. Although, if your client has an issue with dual representation, you'll want to explain to them the difference between dual representation within the same brokerage. Okay, that shouldn't have any implications upon the exclusive agency relationship between me and my client and you and your client. Second document is fair housing and discrimination advisory, just advising what federal fair housing laws are, what the protected classes are. You should read all of these and understand them, though I'm not going to go into them today. Possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. We've already discussed dual representation and the possibility of that taking place. Wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. I will spend a moment on this one because this can seem very scary to a buyer, right? So what you want to explain to your buyer is, oh, buyer, if we end up in escrow under contract, if we're lucky enough to have your offer accepted, not to worry. What we will do is we will make sure that we verify the wiring instructions for the escrow company with the escrow officer directly. We will receive them in an email, and by law, the escrow company must send it in an encrypted email to make sure that it's secure. So if you're receiving wire instructions from an escrow officer that aren't encrypted, you better call them up and have them fix that.
What is encrypted?
Encrypted, it'll be an email that is sent through a secondary server system where you're going to have a password and have to register for it if you haven't worked with that escrow company previously. Okay, and then once your client has received wire instructions, you should, and it is in your best interest to make a conference call with your buyer and contact the escrow officer first and foremost to introduce them because they'll be working closely together. Secondly, to solidify your relationship with the escrow officer, particularly when you're representing a buyer, which is when you're writing an RPA. The escrow officer typically is chosen by the listing agent. So they just naturally have a little bit more allegiance to the listing agent. Though by law, they should be a third neutral party. All right, so, and remember, escrow can move your heaven and earth and you need them on your side. So you want to have that personal touch. And then you will verbally verify these wire instructions with the buyer and the escrow officer to make sure they're accurate, it's legitimate, and it will be safe. All right. Here we are, so the main events, the residential purchase agreement and joint escrow instructions. Just so you guys know, there is more than one type of purchase agreement, just like there is more than one type of listing agreement. Right? So residential purchase agreement is for condos and single families. There is a special purchase agreement for income property and a special purchase agreement for vacant land. All right. There may be others that I'm not as familiar with. There may be one for mobile home. I don't know. We don't do a whole lot of mobile homes because typically mobile homes are on what are called leased land. So it's personal property. It's more like a car sale than it is a real estate sale. We cannot represent clients in that sale unless they actually own the land upon which that mobile home sits. Okay. So you'll notice the revised date here. So though the state often makes their biggest changes at the end of any calendar year, they change things on us all the time without telling us anything. So you always want to check this date. Not this version of the RPA, but our previous I knew by heart. But every once in a while, they'd add an extra paragraph or something in, and I'd get all fucked up, and I'd have no idea what I was talking about. I'd get made fun of because I'd be like, it's section CA2B. That's great. Well, sometimes it was no longer CA2B. Sometimes it was now CA3. So just be careful. You never know. Make sure you check these dates and always read everything. Don't just answer questions. All right. And you'll see the acronym RPA. You can find all of the forms disclosures, contracts that we use in zip forms by either entering in the document name or the acronym for it. All right. Any idea why our RPA would say and joint escrow instructions? Anyone? It is because escrow works. Go ahead.
I was going to say because the escrow company is going to go off of what's here on the purchase agreement.
Escrow has no authority. They can only carry out instructions designated by our contract and any counters, amendments, addendums, modifications that we make to it. So though they issue escrow instructions, it should just be reiterating information we have in our contract. And they'll have their general provisions, which are basically a bunch of jargon that their attorneys threw together to protect them. Okay. So just keep that in mind. It used to be back in the day, you call up an escrow officer and be like, hey, can you draft an amendment for this? Well, they don't have the authority to change your contract. So you must draft an amendment to the contract, send it to them, and they will draft their own escrow amendment mirroring whatever is on your amendment. Top left corner, date prepared. This is a legal reference date. It is not the date that the contract is signed. It is not the date that the contract is accepted. Okay, it is literally the date that you prepared it. I have had clients who say to me, Kristen, that says 2/1. Today is 2/2. Change that. And you know what? I explain it to them so they start to trust me a little bit. I'm like, oh, that's just a legal reference date of preparation, but I'm happy to change it for you. And I just do it. I don't argue. And I only explain so that they realize eventually maybe they can trust me and that I know what I'm doing. This date is important because if you add, if you counter anything, add addendums, end up in contract and change a term or modify something, on the document you use to modify anything that's in the contract, it is going to reference what document you're changing, which is the contract. And it will ask the date of this residential purchase agreement contract. Okay, so this date is going to be used in subsequent documentation, but that's really its only purpose is for legal reference. Okay. Section 1A, this is an offer from, these are your buyer's names, all right? So all buyers' full names should be on here, all right? If you have married people, you will want to make sure that you are writing in whatever their legal names are. So if they've introduced themselves as, you know, the wife is saying that her last name is the husband's, make sure that's actually the case. Find out if it's hyphenated or if she's going by her maiden name. If they're recently married, explain to them that very soon you may be signing loan documents and your driver's license will need to match what we're signing. Otherwise, the notary will not notarize you. This needs to be correct. Would they like a middle initial? Would they like a middle name? If so, they're going to have to sign this on all of their loan documents. It may break their handoff, so they may not want to do so. All right. Also, offers can be made in the name of entities. An entity is corporation, LLC, trust. There are others, but those are the most common. Keep this in mind, however, if your client wants to make an offer in the name of an entity, many lenders have issues lending to entities. What is typically done is a transaction will close if a buyer is purchasing with a loan, and then if they want to transfer title into their trust or something like that, they would do it after close. The property to be acquired is, and then here you're going to have the address. This is my address, but you don't know my apartment number, so good luck finding me. The reason I put my address in here is because it wouldn't let me download it without a valid address, and I had one of my stupid 1, 2, 3 example street addresses in here. So hear that, YouTube. I'm not propagating personal contact information for anyone. It's mine and I'm allowed to do it. I had some YouTube videos kicked off of YouTube because they said I was sharing confidential information. And I was like, no, this stuff is all made up. But good luck arguing with me on my address. So we'll just use that one from now on. So in the city of West Hollywood is its own city. You need to be careful here though, because Los Angeles has many areas, okay? So let's talk about what an area is. Sometimes an area can be written onto an envelope and it will be delivered properly. Sometimes it will not. So you can say Venice. Venice is actually city of LA. Your mail will get where it needs to go. Brentwood, on the other hand, is also city of LA, but if you write Brentwood on an envelope, it's not going to get there because there's actually a city of Brentwood in the state of California. In any case, let's avoid all of that. And no matter what it says on the MLS, let's get the legal city. Where can we get the legal city if everything is saying Venice?
Prelim?
We might not have a preliminary title report at this point because we're buyer's agents.
Property profile?
Yeah, so you can get it on a property profile title software by calling a title rep. You can also ask someone who knows. So just a quick little list of the things off the top of my head, or cities off the top of my head in our general area. Some, but maybe not all inclusive, that are their own individual cities are Culver City, Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, Santa Monica. Is Malibu its own city?
Burbank.
Burbank's LA. No, Burbank is its own city. You're right.
Century City.
No, Century City's Los Angeles.
Inglewood.
Inglewood's its own city, yes.
Palisade.
No, that's Los Angeles. Nope, that's LA. Let me see. I always think it's funny that West Hollywood is its own city, but Hollywood is city of LA.
Oh, wow.
Most of the valley is LA. Glendale's its own city.
Pacific Palisades.
Chatsworth is Pacific Palisades. I just asked you. You said no. No, it's Los Angeles. That's right. It is Los Angeles. Yeah. The one I can't remember is Malibu. I think Malibu is its own city, but I'm not sure on that one. Yeah. But when in doubt, check. Even if you think you know, check. All right. And the reason why this is so important is because the state has requirements for what needs to take place in an escrow in order for the sale to close. But some cities have additional requirements, and Los Angeles and Beverly Hills do have some more complicated things that are necessary and required. If you're ever in doubt if there are additional requirements for what a city needs to close an escrow, well, an escrow officer is a fantastic resource. We have one here in our office, Haley Keefe, so you can always ask her. You can ask someone like me or Michael Rosales. Your mentor should know. If it's in relation to retrofitting, and if you don't know what that is, that's okay. We will go over that further down in the contract. Retrofitting company websites often have, at least in relation to retrofitting requirements, what's required for which city. Oh, and then if you get down into South Bay also, Redondo, Manhattan, Hermosa are all their own cities as well. So is El Segundo.
San Pedro.
San Pedro can be LA or its own city or unincorporated. So I'm going to stay away from that one. That's a very complicated one. All right. And so we want this correct city in here because if we have an inexperienced escrow officer or out of area person involved, or the listing agent is an idiot, which you'll run into, things might not be handled the way they need to. And then all of a sudden you guys are ready to close and oops, you can't because you don't have what's necessary for that city. Right? You have the county, zip code, and then assessor parcel number, more commonly referred to as APN. This blank, this space is often left blank in contracts, and it should never be. It is much more of a legal identification tool for a property than its actual street address, okay? And each county has a slightly different format for that number. In Los Angeles County, it will always be a 4-digit - 3-digit - 3-digit number, okay? Other counties, different format. On a very rare occasion, you may not find an APN. I immediately want you to reach out to your title rep and find out why. There are a couple of reasons why. Perhaps it is new construction and that APN has not yet been issued. Perhaps the lot has recently been subdivided or has been combined. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. Or you're involved with something called a land lease where it's a condominium. However, the building is built upon land which the HOA does not own. Very uncommon, but it happens. So if you don't find one or it's ever in question, just reach out to title and get the right answer. All right. Let's see here. Section 2 is about agency. And that the very first disclosure in the package is referenced here, 2A, so we don't need to worry about that. B, confirmation. So here, you're going to write in the brokerage of the listing agent as well as their brokerage DRE number. You're going to list the listing agent or agents names here and their DRE numbers here. You would specify whether they're representing the seller or both the buyer and seller. Weird, right? If you're writing an offer, is that possible? It is, because, right, remember, it's dual representation if any two agents from the same brokerage are writing on a property. Same thing with buyer's brokerage. That's going to be you if you're writing an RPA. So it will say the same as mine does here. And you'll indicate whether you're representing just the buyer or if there is dual representation involved. Section 2C is for when more than one brokerage, not agent, more than one brokerage. So if you see, if you're writing an offer on a listing where there are two listing agents and there are different brokerages, you'll need to check this box. Or if you are providing co-representation for a buyer with an agent at a different brokerage, you would need to check this box and identify which it is, seller or buyer, that's represented by more than one brokerage, all right? And if that is the case, when you check this box, CAR form ABA, which stands for additional broker acknowledgement, is going to auto-populate so that all of the brokerage information is part of the contract and fits on and nobody misses paying anyone or responsibility or liability or anything like that. All right. Moving forward. Now we come to kind of the nuts and bolts of the RPA. So section 3A is going to be purchase price. Obviously, the buyer is the one who determines what price they want to offer, right? They don't always listen to us, do they? No. Good luck. If you're fortunate enough to have an all cash buyer, you get to check this box, which is my favorite box in the entire RPA. Yay! But most of the time that will not be the case. Checking this box will make it so that some fields in the contract are not available for completion because they're in relation to a loan, and if you're making an all cash purchase, that wouldn't be the case. Sometimes, particularly with high net worth clients or developer clients, you may be writing an offer as an all cash, reserving the right to obtain contingency-free financing. You want the strength of writing the offer as cash, so you would still check this box. When we get to the correct section, I will show you what you need to write in for that option, okay? Section 3B, close of escrow. All right, so there are two options here. One is a certain time period from the day of acceptance. The second is a finite date of close. We typically use the first option because, one, any ideas?
Because it can potentially go longer.
Yeah, so you have no idea how long it is going to take to get your offer accepted or any subsequent counteroffer process. And so if I use a finite date, but it takes us 2 weeks to actually get an offer accepted, well, now I'm in short time. And so particularly if there's a loan, it's very unlikely the people, the people involved, escrow, title, and the buyer's loan professional have the time to complete what they need to complete prior to close. Now, you may make an exception for this if you know for sure your offer is going to get accepted and it's important that it closes on a certain date, or if it's a very long escrow for some reason, or sometimes like cultural things. I think I had some Taiwanese clients once, and a 30-day escrow would have put us on like 8/6 of whatever year. They like 8s. I think it means like good luck or prosperity or something. They asked me if we could do 8/8. For me, I knew I was getting my offer accepted. I spoke to the listing agent about this, why it would be weird, why it'd be a 32-day escrow. And he was like, oh yeah, no problem. Okay. And then let's see here. Expiration of offer. So the way that our contract is written is that the offer expires automatically 3 calendar days after the last buyer's signature at 5 p.m. All right. So if I have a client, 2 buyers, one of them signs it today, one signs tomorrow, well, it would be, today is Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday at 5 p.m. If they both sign today, it would be Sunday at 5 p.m. Make sense? Sometimes you'll want to make this longer. Sometimes you'll want to make this shorter. So if you are trying to be really aggressive or you don't want your offer shop, you might want to shorten this. However, words to the wise, if a listing agent has a hot property, a ton of offers, they don't care what your expiration is. Okay, so you can write a short expiration in here all day long. But unless you've spoken to the listing agent and you're like, I'm going to give you your sun, moon, and stars offer, will your seller accept it? Because we don't want to go through counters. We'll give you everything you want if you just accept our offer. And so if they say yes, you know, the sellers are agreeable to that, then I need to, as the agent, make sure I put a very tight expiration in here, because if I don't, and I leave it the way it is, they technically don't have to respond to me for 3 days. And so they can say yes to me, but then go ahead and shop my offer and use me as collateral in a multiple counter offer process. And I've actually done exactly the opposite of what my intention was, right? I've gone in and I've given them this amazing offer with amazing price and terms, very aggressive. And now the listing agent can just use it as ammunition to get other buyers to beat me. And now I'm betting against myself, right? Or my buyers are betting against themselves. Sometimes it needs to be longer because perhaps people are out of town, clients on a different time zone in a different country, that kind of thing. So, you know, usually the listing agent would let you know if that's the case. And so you can write a longer expiration in here. Also,
the standard 3 days?
3 calendar days after the last buyer's signature at 5 p.m. Just so you know, once an offer expires, if someone receives a second offer, they can't issue a seller multiple counter offer, technically, okay? So if you have a listing and you have an offer, you let it expire, you get a second one, and you're trying to issue a seller multiple counter offer, you are out of compliance. So you can either ask the buyer's agent to send over an addendum extending the expiration of the buyer's offer, or you can make sure you get your seller multiple counter offer out before this expiration. Now, if you have an expired offer and 2 more that come in, which is very often the case when you have a hot property and you have tons of offers, that's fine. You can issue a seller multiple counter offer to everyone. You would just need, as one of the terms in your counter offer, to extend the expiration of that buyer's offer. Does that make sense? Well, there's a class on counter offers, so we'll talk about that more in that class. Oh, right. Initial deposit amount. This is probably one of the most important contingencies within our contract, and it's unique because it is the only contingency that is based on business days. All right, so it is standard for a buyer to deliver their initial money deposit to escrow within 3 business days of acceptance. All right, if your buyer fails to deliver this money, technically there's this gray area here. There is no escrow. If there is no money, there is no escrow. So this, though it's arguable, opens the door to unilateral cancellation by the seller. And the seller will definitely want to cancel because I'm sorry, buyer, if you cannot put in your earnest money deposit in 3 business days, why am I dealing with you, right? This is the only collateral that the buyer puts up in relation for the seller tying themselves up under contract. I forget what the MLS rule is, but you technically have to mark a listing as active under contract. I think it's within 2 days of acceptance. I don't do it. You know, I'd rather get flagged and have to fix it with the MLS. I don't do it until the buyer's deposit is received if it's my listing. Okay. So, any idea why this contingency would be based on business days and not calendar days like every other contingency in our contract? Bank, yeah. How can the buyer get their money in if the bank is closed? They can't. All earnest money deposit, in fact, all money in every escrow must be delivered by wire transfer to escrow. There is no cashier's check, there is no cash, there is no personal check. Okay. So when I enter escrow, open escrow, I tell my buyer to get their earnest money deposit in as soon as possible. Also keep in mind, guys, in order to send a wire, well, wire cutoff times are slightly different for every bank, but they're generally in the lunchtime area, somewhere between 12 and 1 usually. So if your client waits until the very last day, they had better go first thing in the morning. And another thing for you to mention to your clients is that a lot of banks require their clients to go in person to a bank branch in order to wire a certain dollar amount. I think it's generally anything over $10,000, but each bank is different. So prepare your buyer for that so that they make the time for it. A lot of them think they can go ahead and do it online. And during the pandemic, banks were letting them do it online. That is no longer the case. All right. Some banks also, I know because I just switched banks, try to hold your fucking money hostage. I was like, are you fucking joking me? I can't send a wire for 30 grand. It is my money. And they're like, yeah, you have this hold. And I'm like, what? Yeah. So have them try to do it on the first day. I moved my money from Chase to Citibank after that. Fuck you, Chase. I had some other issues with Chase also. Sometimes a client needs to move money, particularly for loan purposes, from one account to another to send the funds to escrow. Though wire transfer should be instantaneous, sometimes the receiving bank will not issue that money as a wire out that same day, sometimes not even the next day, sometimes 48 hours later. So let's make sure we talk to our buyers about getting their funds prepared. All right.
The expiration of the offer is the calendar day. Like if I write the offer today, expire on.
Yeah. If you wrote an offer today, which is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday at 5 p.m.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Increase deposit. Oh, by the way, what is the typical percentage of the purchase price that we use for the earnest money deposit? 3%. Can it be more or less?
Yes.
Yeah. What if you're offering less? What does that look like?
Less attractive.
It's less attractive to the seller. More?
More attractive.
More attractive, but more. Here's the deal. An earnest money deposit is the collateral that's put up in escrow. And it is the only money that a seller would be entitled to in the case that the buyer lifted all of their contingencies and yet failed to close. Okay. I've had this happen twice in my career. It does happen. All right. So if your buyer offers a higher earnest money deposit amount, and in a very, very rare instance, they go through the entire escrow, but don't close, whatever that dollar amount is what the seller is able or is legally eligible to have. A lot of times they'll fight about it. A lot of times they'll negotiate. Sometimes the buyer's just like, yeah, I kind of fucked you, have it.
Should you tell the buyer before, like educate him or?
I mean, if you need to educate your buyer as to what an earnest money deposit is, sure, but no reason to scare them. I typically have the conversation later down the road. They will ask, can I get this money back if I cancel? And I'll tell them, absolutely, you are legally entitled to receive all of this money back as long as you cancel with any contingency protection in place. Okay. And when I lift the last contingency, I have a conversation with my buyer again at that time. Hey buyer, are you absolutely sure? Because this is the last contingency. And so we have no more outs. It is a done deal, or your deposit is at risk if we fail to close. Okay. It's not as simple as that, but I'm not going to go into that. Technically, everything has to be agreed to, including cancellation by mutual agreement and signatures, including release of deposit, no matter what is actually legally right. They fight too much, it goes to court. It's going to go per the terms of the contract, and whoever lost is also going to have to pay legal fees for the prevailing party and possibly damages. But I have seen buyers actually hold sellers hostage in an escrow. You know, maybe this buyer's like, I want $100,000 credit, and the seller's like, no way. Well, the buyer won't sign cancellation. Well, until the buyer signs cancellation, the seller cannot rent that property, change that property, sell that property to someone else, do anything. I had some agent in a class quite some time ago bragging about that, and I was like, get out, nobody here is ever going to do business with you. I would keep that to yourself. All right, section 3D, to increase deposit. So there is the ability to offer an increased deposit, okay? And a buyer would typically do this in a really competitive situation. And you can offer whatever you like, a dollar amount, a percentage, and you can do it at a finite date, a date from the date of period of time from the date of acceptance or upon an event. Typically, I would recommend, if this is again rarely used, but if you are offering an increased deposit, I would typically recommend it happening upon an event. The time that I like to do so is at the time that the buyer is ready to lift the contingency for their investigation. Okay. Why? Well, there are two things that really lead to cancellation in a contract. Something that's uncovered in investigations, whether that's inspections, written reports, things like that, or because they have issues obtaining a loan. Those are your two big hurdles. And so there are two ways to offer an increased deposit. An increased deposit is not necessarily collateral that is up for grabs for the seller in the case that the buyer lifts all of their contingency protections and fails to cancel. It is only available for the seller to go after if you use CAR form, ZIP form, DID, okay? And DID stipulates that this money is or is not also available to the seller to go after in the case that the buyer lifts those contingencies and fails to close. I hate our new contract because it is more idiot proof. I used to love to offer increased deposits, and I would not give anyone par form DID because they don't read and they didn't know any better. So basically I was offering an increased deposit that the seller never could get their hands on. So I was getting all of the benefit of, you know, my offer looking better without ever risking a cent of the additional deposit funds. But that is no longer the case. So I think it actually will even auto-populate in your transaction file if you click on the increased deposit box here. And no one's gonna miss it now. You're not gonna get away with it. All right, section E1, loan amounts. So if your buyer is purchasing with a loan, you're going to enter here the dollar amount of the loan. All right, so loan amounts can range anywhere from, and they can range anywhere from, I've seen 5% down loans, although kind of shaky, or quite a bit. I mean, I think I've written one where we were, where we had like 80% cash down, we're taking 20% loan. I don't think lenders like to loan very small amounts, but if you are writing a loan where it is 10% down and 90% loan, you know, that's a little iffier, that's a little riskier. Make sure you talk to your buyer's loan professional and kind of feel that out. 5%, same thing. If I'm a listing agent and I see an offer written with 5% down and 95% loan, I'm definitely grilling the hell out of the loan professional that is involved with that buyer. Okay, not to say it can't be done, it absolutely can. There are just different terms in the loan. But our most standard is about 80% loan, 20% down. Okay, that is our most common, but it can be different. And if you wouldn't be using this purchase contract, but for a residential income purchase agreement, RIPA, a RIPA, it is typically higher. So if you are writing an offer for a buyer where you see the loan amount at 80% on income property, you probably need to talk to their loan professional. They haven't talked to their loan professional and don't realize they probably can't have the same loan for that type of property. They typically want to see 25 to 30% down on that type of property. Okay, yeah?
Conventional, yeah.
Yeah.
On an income?
This means duplex, triplex, fourplex. Can we write an offer on anything 5 or more? If you're in here, you're learning residential, you don't know, right? 5 or more is commercial, subject to different laws and terms. I wouldn't do it. It's unethical for me to represent a client in a transaction where I don't believe that I can do the best job for them. And at best, I would be stressed and fumbling through it. So what do you need to do? You need to either refer it to a commercial agent, partner with a commercial agent, something like that, okay? All right, so loan amount, all right. The second line here, very important, not to exceed blank percent. I see this all the time, blank. This is super bad that you're leaving it blank. Let me tell you why. Because a loan contingency covers all of the terms within what you're writing into the contract. So right now we have a fairly volatile interest rate situation, right? It can go up and down. We've seen a lot of change pretty drastically, quickly. Well, if I write a maximum interest rate in here, and during the course of my escrow, you know, the interest rate that my client can get jumps, or they find out something in the underwriting process, which means they can only qualify for a loan with a much higher interest rate, it gives my client the ability to cancel if they cannot get a loan for this percentage I've written in here or lower. So my buyers will often call me scared. They're like, no, my mortgage broker told me my interest rate's going to be this. And I say, no, I totally understand that. This has nothing to do with that. I'm capping it off at something reasonable to give you the extra added cancellation privilege of canceling even if you can get a loan, but not at a rate at this percentage or lower. Okay, so you do not want to leave this blank.
How low can you go on that?
I
realistically?
If I see something that I think is even kind of low in there, I'm calling my loan professional. I'm like, hey, is this reasonable? Like, what are rates right now? And he'll tell me, I'll counter it. I'll counter it and counter offer. So I don't know. I haven't written an offer in like a month and a half. So I don't know. Yes.
So today's rates were for 30 years 6.16. So what would you?
Yeah. So I would call the buyer's loan professional just as I should every single time I write an offer. Okay. And I would ask them what the buyer's rate is in here. And I would probably ask them what they thought was reasonable for me to write in here as a maximum also. Also, I'm going to check in with them. I'm going to talk to them about the terms. If it's a condo, sometimes the HOA dues dollar amount can decrease the amount that a buyer can borrow. So I'm always checking in with the lender. Plus I have to call them anyways, because I want to find out how short I can write in for my appraisal and my loan contingency. Every time I write an offer, there are things I'm doing before. All right. I am talking to the listing agent to make sure that there is nothing I need to know. I am speaking with my buyer. I am speaking with the buyer's loan professional to make sure we're all in line, we're all on the same page, and we can all perform under the terms I write into this contract. Because what I write into this contract, my clients are legally bound to. And so if I don't check with their loan professional, I'm writing really aggressive timeframes in here. That is my fault. That is my problem, right? I have now set us up for absolute failure. Be wary if you speak to a buyer's lender and they're giving you really, really long contingencies as well. Ask them why. There may be a reason for it. Perhaps they have, funny type of income or this or that. That may be the case. And if it's going to be long, you need to definitely explain all of these things to the listing agent prior to submitting your offers so that they are receiving them properly and well. And if they have any fears, you can put them in touch with that loan professional who can better explain things. Because if you're asking for long time frames, makes the offer less attractive. You need to win over the listing agent, your ambassador to the buyer or to the seller. Okay. Explain anything that is abnormal. Have a verbal negotiation and discussion. Support it. Further explain it in the email where you deliver your offer so that they can share that with the buyer. If they don't understand and think it's reasonable on their end as a listing agent, their seller is not going to. You're not going to get your offer accepted. You may or may not get a counter, particularly if there are multiple offers. So Anything abnormal needs to be discussed. All right, buyer to pay up to blank points to obtain the rate above. A buyer can actually pay a lender to buy their rate down. I never fill out this box. This has nothing to do with me. This is a separate agreement between the buyer and their loan professional, okay? Then we have 17 days after acceptance. This only applies if it's an FHA or VA loan. Sometimes the lender will require the seller to fix certain items that a seller typically wouldn't. Okay, and this gives us a time frame in which the buyer must deliver, or the buyer's agent must deliver a list of these repairs to the seller. Okay, so the way our contract is written is for a conventional loan. However, if you are writing for an FHA or VA here, seller financing is also referred to as a seller carryback mortgage or loan. This means that the seller either owns the property free and clear, or they have a massive amount of equity and are able to pay off any existing loans, taxes, costs, commissions through the close of escrow, based on whatever portion of the buyer's purchase is cash down, and they are going to be the buyer's lender. It is very complicated. It can be risky. It can be advantageous. So the buyer is basically the lender, or sorry, the seller is basically the lender giving the buyer a loan.
Desirable, or it's always a bit huge?
Look, it's not necessary. It's rarely desirable to a seller. A seller most of the time wants their money, right? But I'll give you an example. I had an elderly client who had an even more elderly sugar mama wife who passed away and left him this gorgeous mansion in Brownwood. The man made fantastic money and was pretty much already set for life. He owned his home free and clear, meaning there were no loans. And we had several offers that came in on it. And one of them, the husband had fantastic credit, fantastic income, this and that. The wife was an absolute wreck. She had definitely been shopping way too much and this and that. And they could not qualify for a loan rate that they wanted, right? I explored the option with my client of a seller carryback mortgage because they asked about it, because they could get a loan, but it was going to be really high interest rate. Some special loan because, they could only qualify the husband on it. And my client was like, well, what does that look like? And so I showed him. And they also put down a huge down payment too. Like he walked away with I think they put 40 or 50% of the purchase price down on like a $3 million home, right? So I think he did a seller carryback mortgage for about 1.5. And the reason why he chose to do that is because we gave them a really high interest rate, still lower than what they would have gotten with a lender. But my client was retired and he's like, this is way, way higher return than any investment account I'm gonna have. Plus it's secured. Plus, even though it'd be really hard and cost him a lot of money, if they ever defaulted and went into foreclosure, he gets the house back, right? So for him, this made sense because he didn't need the money and because this is a nearly guaranteed return secured by real estate property. But this is a rare circumstance because most of the time the seller needs or wants that money. Okay. Oh, also, most of them are not 30-year loans like we often would see in a conventional loan, not necessarily in this market, but in most markets. It was a 5-year loan where I think they were paying like interest only or very small principal and interest only with a 5-year balloon. Because in 5 years, they were confident they can get the wife's credit fixed and they can go ahead and refinance that out, which they did and paid it off, and everything was fine. So there's special forms for that. It is extremely complicated. You have to have a note and deed drafted, have credit reports pulled. If you ever do anything like that, you're going to want to work with Michael Rosales. Not even me. I've done it like once, and I don't like you enough to spend that much time with you. Yeah. Probably would, especially if you gave me booze or a cupcake or something. Let's see. Section E2. This is just like Section E1. However, it's for a second loan, right? It is not common to write an offer knowing that the buyer is going to purchase a property with a second loan. It's usually something that's figured out and worked out during the course of escrow between the loan professional and the buyer, okay? Nobody cares if that changes. By the time anyone else really knows, it's time to get loan documents and no one cares. Everyone's happy with their close. So this is very rarely filled out, but in the instance that the buyer's loan professional tells you they're purchasing with a first and second, and you know that, technically, if you don't put it on here, it's fraud. So try not to know that. But if you do have to know that, you fill it out just like you do the section above. All right, occupancy type. The way that our contract is written is for primary occupancy, meaning the buyer is going to live in the property. This is important because what did we just talk about? Well, if a lender might want a different percentage or a different percentage of the purchase price down for something that's a secondary home, and certainly for an investment property, and their interest rate might be different. A lot of buyers lie about this. I do not want to know. I will write the contract however you want. Just nobody tell me. So if someone's like, da, 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 I'm like, nope, la, 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 la. You're telling me you're going to live here, right? Great. You talk with whoever you want about that except for me. That's not my problem, not my area. Don't want to hear it. Stop. But if you know it's going to be secondary or investments and you know it's set up that way, you fill it out that way. Right? Balance of down payment. All right. So you've entered in the purchase price, right? You've entered in the initial deposit amount, the loan amount, and now the balance of down payment is going to be whatever the total down payment the buyer is making minus the amount in the earnest money deposit, right? So if we're putting 20% cash down, we've offered a 3% earnest money deposit. The dollar amount that should go here should be 17% of the purchase price, yes. Double check yourself here. These numbers will auto-populate because, so if we're putting 20% down, we've already given 3% in the earnest money deposit. So what we need to bring in is 20% minus 3%, which is going to be 17%. Yeah. Also, just double check these numbers. I am the queen of one too many or one too few zeros. And man, that will make someone very happy or very sad. All right. Section G1, seller credit, if any, to buyer. This is very uncommonly used. It is not common in a healthy housing market like Los Angeles. And no matter what you think or what you hear, LA's housing market is very healthy, always has been and always will be, no matter what kind of financial situation our country is in. Why? Because we are in a desirable area. Okay. I have seen in outlying areas or sometimes as an incentive, like kind of a gimmick, where a seller is agreeing to give a credit to the buyer to buy down their rate. Remember that points thing in the loan section we were talking about that I said we don't fill out? I've seen a couple gimmicks like that around, but this is very, very rare. It's very rare a seller agrees to provide a credit to the buyer through the close of escrow, in the contract initially. It's very rare that in a normal transaction, a seller gives any type of credit prior to negotiations taking place after the investigation contingency. However, if it does happen, like let's say the seller has a termite report, they expect to do termite work for the buyer, ha ha ha, because they have a really crummy agent and they don't realize that is no longer standardly part of our contract. It used to be that a seller was obligated to take care of Section 1 termite items, and it was literally part of our contract. We've taken that out and we completely hide that, and it's now just part of the inspections that we do for the buyer independently. So, they'll get a termite report and they'll tell the listing agent, oh, yeah, I'm going to pay for this. They'll give it to the buyer, they'll dispose it up front, and they're like, okay, so we'll give the credit amount, let's say the work costs $2,000. Instead of writing that in here, the seller credit, you should apply that as a reduction to the purchase price and discuss that with the listing agent. Why? Because if you put any kinds of credits in here, it could give the lender a little alert buzz, and they might want to ask why. And then they might try to make you do the work prior to the close of escrow or prior to approving a loan or issuing loan documents, which can cause an issue. The seller doesn't want to move out, so the house can be fumigated 3 days you know, a week and a half before they plan to permanently move, that kind of thing. So try not to use this if you don't have to, and try to apply it towards purchase price, reduction of purchase price instead by just offering $2,000 less on your purchase price. Okay. This is also advantageous a little bit to the buyer and seller because all of the fees that they both pay are based on the purchase price during escrow. Also, the transfer taxes that the seller pays are going to be slightly lower because the purchase price is lower, and the property taxes that the buyer pays are based on the purchase price as well. So those will always be slightly lower. Very advantageous to do it this way.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, how are you going to put on the RPA where the seller decide to pay down the point for the buyer?
I don't put it in there.
Oh,
yeah, I don't put it in there. I would just, well, I could put it in there. I haven't done it. This doesn't happen very often. I would just reduce the purchase price by that amount if my buyer has the cash to cover it. If they do not, then I would write it probably under additional finance terms or in other terms, and the contract will come to that place later. And I would check with my buyer's loan professional to ask for the exact wording I should include in the contract for that. Okay.
all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Christen, I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any form, if we decide to lower the purchase price, any form that we have to submit?
Well, if you're doing it at this time, relevant to the residential purchase agreement, no, you would just tell the listing agent, instead of your seller giving us the $2,000 credit, I'm just going to offer $2,000 less on the offer price.
Okay, so no amendment, nothing to be amendment to decide, I mean, between the buyer and the seller, that they have to agree to the new price?
You don't have an accepted offer at this point, so you have nothing to amend.
Ah, okay. Okay, and after the acceptance?
I cover that in inspections and negotiations class.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Additional finance terms. Remember, I mentioned that sometimes you'll have really high net worth clients or developers who want to write a cash offer, but they may obtain a loan. They have the option in order to complete their purchase, but they want the offer to have the strength of a cash offer. So what do I write? Well, under additional finance terms, I would write this language, and I'm going to pull up the chat box for this one, if I can figure out how. Where is my chat box? How do I get chat box, guys? Maybe this. Maybe bigger. Ow.
Down at the bottom. There it is.
Where?
At the bottom. Down at the bottom of the screen. There's
Thank you. All right, so under section G2, additional finance terms, I would use this. And remember, this does not give the buyer any protection for a loan. It simply gives them the right to obtain a loan. Okay? So that they have the strength of writing what looks like a cash offer, but the ability to obtain a loan if they would prefer, right? Buyer reserves the right to obtain contingency-free financing. Their sole discretion. So what does this do? It binds the seller, escrow, and everyone into cooperating with the buyer's loan professional. However, if the buyer is not able to obtain a loan, they cannot cancel because they can't obtain a loan. They would be required contractually to complete the purchase cash. Okay.
That's so, if you treat the cash, right?
Yeah, this is if I have to show proof of funds for the entire purchase price and all of that. And I really am only doing this in the instance that my buyer truly can do both and is willing to do both. Okay. You know, I have clients who can purchase cash, but you know, they have those private banking relationships where they can get loans the rest of us normal human beings can only aspire to ever dream of, because the bank wants their money on deposit with them so badly that they are willing to give them things that other people cannot have, right? So like, for instance, I had a client who had 20 something million on deposit with the bank. They got a 1.5% interest rate loan. Why would you buy anything cash when you can borrow money that cheaply? You know, it's advantageous because property in Los Angeles is appreciating at a value higher than that. So you're basically risking nothing. You still have all of your liquid cash. You can do anything you want with, right? And continue to obtain interest on, probably at a higher rate at this bank that values your deposits so highly. It's basically a win-win for them.
So I have a question.
Yes.
If that verbiage is not added into the contract, and the buyer decides after you're in escrow, hey, I want to obtain financing, is the escrow, are the escrow and the listing side not obligated to cooperate with the buyer?
Technically, they are not. I don't see many of that often where that takes place, but I'll give you an example. I will not name names. I had a really, really hot off-market income property. I had 2 lots right next to each other for a massive development opportunity. I shopped it to the agents in this office first, like a good Keller Williams co-broker, you know, in the spirit of collaboration. I obtained an acceptance right away. It was all cash. Now those fuckers closed late. They had loans. They made things complicated. Well, I issued them a notice of reform because they didn't have the right to hold anything up for a loan. I did not have to provide access to an appraiser or anything like that. And I was outside of contractual dates where I had to provide them access whatsoever. And guess what? I got my own buyer, hire for reals, all cash, who could have swooped in and closed on that. Did my clients want that? Yes. Did I want that? Yes. So I issued them a notice of reform and they actually coughed up the cash and brought it in. So yes, if you don't have this language, you can get yourself in trouble if the buyer wants to switch to financing. However, you can also be honest and negotiate and the seller can agree to it, right? But the seller has to want to agree to it. And you better make sure that, you know, you have no idea if there are other interested parties that are offering better terms. All right, moving on. G3, seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. This is particularly for off-market property. And when I say off-market, I'm using the term incorrectly. Biggest pet peeve of mine. Someone's like, I've got a pocket listing, Kristen. Do you have a buyer? And I'm like, yes, I do. Where's your listing agreement? Oh, I don't have a listing agreement. They don't have an off-market. They don't have a pocket listing. They have a seller lead and they're using my buyer as a way to get the seller's business. And that is fine. But what is not covered that I would want to have covered?
Commission.
Yeah. How am I going to get paid? So,
is it okay, like, to ask, do you have a listing agreement? Show me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. If they act weird about it, you know they don't. So what would you need if you are a buyer's agent at that point? Either you need a single party agreement where the seller is agreeing to pay you. You don't give a fuck if the listing agent and the seller have one. This is about you getting paid. Otherwise, why would you introduce your buyer to that property? You wouldn't. Or you need to have a buyer representation agreement where the buyer's agreeing to pay your commission. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes the other agent is like, no, the seller won't pay any buyer agent commission. Well, what you need to say to your buyer is, I have potentially a great property for you. I don't know if you'll like it. And until we see it, I can't tell you if it has a good value, but the seller will not pay commission. So, would you agree to pay me the commission if the numbers make sense for you, right? If this is an unbelievable out of this world deal, that should make sense. But if the buyer doesn't have the cash to pay you commission, because they can't borrow that from a lender, right? Then that's not really a possibility. In any case, if you get a single party from the seller, great. But I would also, in that instance, if I'm writing an offer on something, even when I have a single party agreement that the seller signed to pay me as a buyer's agent, I would still check this box here and CAR form SPBB would auto-populate and I would complete that. I don't know what that looks like. I haven't ever looked at it. I haven't had to use it. I don't do much off-market property stuff. But I highly recommend you take a look. All right, section H1, verification of all cash. Right, so if you have an all cash offer, the way our contract is written says that it is attached to the offer. You don't have to change anything. You should never change anything because if you're writing an all cash offer and proof of funds does not accompany that offer, your offer is worthless. No listing agent and seller are going to accept that. They're just not going to. Okay. So the next section, H2, is for verification of down payment and closing costs. So in the case the buyer is making offer to purchase with loan, which is going to be most of the time, you still need to show proof of funds for the portion of the purchase price that the buyer is going to bring in cash. So if it's an 80% loan, 20% down, $1 million property, I need to show proof of funds for how much? 200. But not just that. Let's say someone writes an offer on my listing. I get this offer. They show me the proof of funds for 200,000, but I talk to their lender or their agent mentions like this is at the absolute max of their purchase price ability or comfort level. Or even just because I'm going to go back to them. I want to see more than 200,000 because it's not just asking for verification of down payment. It's also asking for proof of what?
Closing costs.
The amount of money for closing costs because the buyer has to have money for that too. When I was an assistant, I worked for some agents where this was actually a problem. The buyer, even though everything was disclosed to her and signed off on and everything, threw an absolute fit because what are you talking about closing costs? The purchase price is this is what I'm paying. I don't have an additional this. And we're like, well, you have no contingencies. You're going to have to borrow some money. Good luck with that. But that's just, that's plain stupid because lender discloses fees. Escrow gives you estimated closing statements. She knew better. She's just trying to pull a fast one.
So should she have maybe offered 17%?
No. I'm just saying, make sure when you talk to your buyer to get the proof of funds, this will keep you from ever being in that situation. Is we need to show a proof of funds for our whatever total percentage down plus closing costs. Do we know what closing costs are going to be? No. But if a buyer is purchasing with a loan, their closing costs, and I'm always on the high side because high is better than too low, between 1.5% to 2% of the purchase price. So if I'm putting 20%, if they're putting 20% down on $1 million purchase, and I need to show proof of funds for closing costs and down payment, what does that proof of funds need to be for?
Say that again, sorry.
Add the closing costs, and I told you 1.5% to 2% of purchase price, right? So that's 15 to 20K.
Right.
Okay, so I want to show proof of funds for 220K. Okay, and my buyers, I tell them, a lot of them are like, I don't want the seller to know I have this much money. They're not going to take my offer. And I'm like, oh, their agent knows I'm a good agent and I would never let you overpay. Show them all the money you have in the world. Make them know that you are a strong buyer. We are not here to be veiled. We are here to win. Yes.
This 1.5% to 2% doesn't include the loan point. What if there's a point in that?
Points are not paid on every loan. Points are optional to buy down a rate, right, Errol?
Doesn't have to have money in case.
Points are not paid on every loan. That's an optional thing.
It's an optional thing.
So that has nothing to do with me, and I don't give a fuck. That's not my arena. I'm an agent, not a mortgage broker. Yeah.
So quick question.
Yes.
So like before we signing the contract, we need to make sure the buyer, before putting the offer, he has a 20% plus 1.5% to 2%.
Whatever their total down payment is, it doesn't have to be 20%. They could be putting 10% down. They could be putting 20. They could be putting 50.
So whatever down payment.
Yeah. Plus closing costs.
Okay.
Yes. And not right before you're making an offer. I mean, a lot of times you want to know that a buyer has money before you really put in the work with them, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of them don't like to give you that proof of funds straight up. When I work with a buyer, I'm just like, hey, in order for us to get showing, sometimes I'm going to have to show the listing agent a proof of funds. So I need you to send me one of those. I'll exercise my discretion. I have the luxury at this point of most of my clients being repeat clients or referrals from people. So I don't have to worry that much about it. And I can be kind of lazy about that. But I mean, when I was still scrounging for business and barely paying my rent, I had a fucking buyer like take me through rounds of counter offers and never actually had money. She's like, oh yeah, I'm sending it. Oh yeah, my accountant's sending it. Thank God the listing agent was my old boss. And so although I was super embarrassed, he was nice. And I'll probably never tell anyone that I brought him a worthless offer. But yeah, she just put me through the ringer. I mean, hours and hours of pointless work.
So the proof of funds, you get it from the bank or from the lender?
From the buyer. The buyer is going to pull whatever kind of statements they want. Investment account, bank statement, multiple accounts, however they want to.
Okay.
On a rare occasion where the buyer does not want to show a bank balance, you have the alternative of having them get a letter from their banking institution saying that they carry an average balance in an amount that exceeds whatever dollar amount you need to show.
It's called a verification of deposit.
Yeah.
What about closing costs? Approximately, what is the amount?
I told you 1.5% to 2% of the purchase price. If the buyer is purchasing cash, it's typically around 1%.
Christen, is that an addition to the pre-approval letter?
That's separate, and we're going to go over the pre-approval letter next. All right, so that's item H3, verification of loan application, which the way our contract is written says is it is attached to the offer. Why? Because if your buyer is purchasing with a loan and you submit an offer, if they don't have a pre-approval, I have no idea as a listing agent that they've even spoken to a loan professional and have any ability to obtain a loan. Even then, a lot of times pre-approvals are just something someone will write, a mortgage broker will write based on a verbal conversation. Who knows if the buyer was actually honest with them, that sort of thing. But again, I have the luxury of working with people I know, so I'm not in that boat that much. But you definitely want to make sure that, someone you don't know has done that, right? You definitely want to have a conversation with the buyer's lender, because if a buyer's lender is telling you, it's really stretching here, it depends on the property, you have to be a little bit more concerned about these things and involve their loan professional a little more often before you start writing offers, right? In any case, next to this, you have to check a box for either pre-qualification, pre-approval, or fully underwritten pre-approval. Pre-qualification and pre-approval, no agent knows the difference. Okay. Pre-qualification, I think, means you've had a conversation with the mortgage broker and they're going based off your verbals. Pretty sure pre-approval means that there's a loan application and there are at least some financial documents. Yeah. What do I check? Well, on my letter from the buyer's mortgage professional, it doesn't usually stipulate, which it is. I always check pre-approval. What is fully underwritten pre-approval? Well, this is it's not common. It's also called DU or direct underwriting, right? And I typically won't have my buyer do this, even if the listing agent is demanding it, because this means a credit report has been pulled, in addition to their application being run through, what's it called?
Your DU-LP.
So it's run and credit's pulled. If my buyer's credit report is pulled too many times, it could cause them an issue. Usually not, because when a credit report is pulled, it usually just dings the credit score a couple of points. But if you're doing this many times, it can be an issue. So I'm sorry, listing agent, unless you're telling me that you're going to accept my client's offer, right? Unless you want to just issue me a counter offer back where all of the terms are acceptable and that's one of the terms or that's the only term. No, we're not doing it. Sometimes I'll do it just because I want to be so aggressive and my client's credit score spoken with their loan professional is so outstanding that it doesn't matter. And so we'll do it to like knock it home. It basically means everything about the buyer and the loan are approved except for the property, right? And this is not covered in our contract, but a lot of listing agents will ask you to have your buyer cross-qualify with their preferred lender. I hate that, as if, first off, we're going to give my client's private information to someone affiliated with you, and I'm going to have someone they don't want to talk to hounding them. No. What do? I have my buyer's loan professional get permission from my buyer, extract all personal information, and send over credit report, application, all of that. I have their loan professional handle it. No one's going to argue with that. And I actually completely ignore the listing agent every time they tell me to have my client cross-qualify with their lender. Yeah, I completely ignore them. Let them serve me a notice of form. If they're saying it is a prerequisite to getting my offer accepted, then I just have my buyer's loan professional give them redacted documents that show their borrowing ability. Question?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, why on earth would I want anyone affiliated with the listing agent having my client's personal information? Go fuck yourself. I know a way around that. You know, stay in your lane. I want people that are allegiant only to my client, working with my client, right? Final verification of condition, also referred to as final walkthrough. This is an appointment that takes place for the buyer to visually inspect the property within 5 days prior to the close of escrow, unless you change the date range here. The purpose of this final walkthrough is A, to make sure that the property is in the same condition as it was at the time the buyer made the offer. Like, you know, nobody's put holes in the wall, you know, ran a car through the, you know, through the garage, maybe no significant damage has taken place when the seller moved their items out. So this one's a funny thing. It's, also to verify that any repairs that were negotiated that the seller was going to perform are done, although do not wait until this appointment to verify that yourself as a buyer's agent, because oh my God, to scramble and come to an agreement to get something done that should have been already done a couple of days prior to close, very problematic. You know, the buyer may have already signed their loan documents, their loan rate might be expired. We don't have tons of leverage as a buyer's agent the last few days. We're pretty much stuck. So buyer's agent, beware. I've had this before where a listing agent and seller are lying to me about repairs being done and that kind of thing. I'll talk to you about that more in inspections and negotiations class.
So what do you write here?
Nothing, you leave it at 5. But I try to make it after the sellers move out, but before we fund the loan, because once we fund the loan, it's a done deal, right? I can't always do that. So I'd rather do it sooner than later, even if the seller hasn't got all their stuff out. Sometimes the seller is going to do what's called a lease back, where they stay in the property for a certain time frame after the transaction closes. I teach a whole class on that, so we're not going to discuss that. And so that's unavoidable. But at the end of the day, this is more so your buyer has probably just given escrow a ton of money or is about to. And it's a great way to give them a feel good, remind them of what they're buying, let them bring their friends and family in. They want to measure for the blinds that you told them, oh, let's leave the seller alone. We just pissed them off because we got a massive credit from them. You know, this is one of those feel goods to spend some time just enjoying yourselves and checking everything out. Assignment request. All right, so an assignment is where an offer is written in the name of a buyer. And during the course of the escrow, the buyer wants to assign the escrow to someone else or something, an entity else, or add a buyer or remove a buyer. All right, so there are legitimate assignments where, oh, you know what? I've decided I want to purchase in the name of my LLC, or you know what? I want to purchase with my dad, right? Or my dad was on title or on the contract with me, but, and this is not true, I have excellent credit, but I have shitty credit. And so now I want my dad to just buy the property on his own, right? So we're just assigning the escrow and all of the interest, the right to purchase the property to that person. An assignment, as long as it includes the same parties, like maybe I'm purchasing now in the name of my trust because I'm purchasing cash and I can do that easily. Should be like the same parties, you know, if I have an entity, I'm the trustee of that trust. Most people don't care when it's, you know, I'm adding someone, subtracting someone, and sending to an entity. But there are also illegal assignments, and it happens all the time. And these asses go around calling themselves wholesalers. Okay, this is 100% illegal. This is an illegal type of assignment. What this is this is a shady, horrible person. And you know what? You want to report them and you want to get them out of our business. They go around to people, they prey on elderly people, they go direct a lot of times, or, you know, they screw with us. We have an openly listed property. They tie you up in escrow, never having the intention of closing, never having the intention of buying that property. What they're doing is they're tying you up in escrow, and then they are selling their escrow to someone completely unrelated to them for a higher dollar amount. They're making money by committing fraud against the seller by selling their escrow. So let's say, you know, this person approaches, and a lot of times it's fucking agents doing this. They're approaching a little old lady and they're like, her house is worth 700,000, when in actuality it's worth 800,000. So what they're doing is they're having someone come in and make an offer. They're going into escrow, and then they're going around to the developers or other buyers in town, and they're saying, we'll sell this escrow to you for 750. The house is worth 8.
Wow.
Even though the seller's only getting 700.
Is it really you protect yourself? Are you saying that?
Yeah. If someone tries to change the name of a buyer in escrow, find out why. And if it is not the same people and it's not legitimate, cancel on them and report them. Yeah. And if someone tells you that they do this, a lot of people that do this don't even know it's illegal. They're such garbage skis bags. Do report them, get them out of our industry. Because why? How does this hurt the seller?
They're not getting top dollar.
They're not getting top dollar, but what else? Well, whoever is telling them the value of their house is committing fraud, right? They're taking advantage of them. But also, they're tying the seller's home up under contract, which means they can't sell it to anyone else, right? Which, if it was listed, also will show days on market and a cancellation, which can hurt the seller's chances of selling at all or selling at the right price, right?
You see, if you send the cancellation of notice and the other guy doesn't send the cancellation, they tie up property for the long time.
Tell them they're going to call the Department of Real Estate and all these other things and report them for absolute fraud. That they're going to go to whatever, you know, whatever authority and report them because they're committing fraud. It is financial fraud. It is contract fraud. And if they have any kind of license or anyone involved in the transaction has a license, go after it, file an ethics complaint at the board and file a legal complaint. Yeah. Now, everyone says I should be an attorney. You know why I'm not? Because attorneys work with miserable people most of the time. I get to make people happy. I like what I do. And even though I sound like these are like scumbag. These are horrible people. Get rid of them. People think that real estate agents are unscrupulous, and a lot of them are, but I'm not, and I hope you aren't going to be either. And the only way we change that perception is that we get rid of the people who engage in this type of behavior. Commercial's different. They can do shady shit. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't know if it's shady because I think a lot of that's allowed. It has different rules and all of that. So none of this applies to commercial real estate. I don't know what does apply to commercial real estate. I'm pretty sure contract fraud is still contract fraud. So at the end of the day, let's see here. Okay, loan contingency is very closely related to appraisal contingency, okay? Because you cannot get loan approval without having appraisal review and approval. So I hate the way our contract under section L1 and L2 is written, where they're both 17 days. Why? Well, if I don't have appraisal in and approved, then I can't have loan approval. And most time, by the time we get the appraisal in and it is approved, it takes a couple of days for the underwriter to review all of that and give us formal loan approval. So I would like to see a minimum of a 3-day difference between these two guys, because if you leave them the same, you're probably setting yourself up for your mortgage broker to miss your loan approval deadline. Okay. They may not know any better. But you can't get both on the same day. Well, it's not true. You can get an appraisal waiver, but we're not going to talk about that. You cannot have both on the same day. So I want to see a minimum of 3-day difference between this. So if you're going to modify these dates at all, who do you need to talk to? Who decides if you can do this? Yeah, the mortgage professional. You don't write in 10 days under appraisal and 14 or 17 under loan. You ask them, hey, what do I need for loan and appraisal? And if they say, oh, you can leave it as standard, say, well, can I write 14 in for the appraisal? Because obviously you need that before the loan. And you write 14 in for the appraisal and 17 for the loan. Or, and they may just say that. So if you have urgency, like if you have a lot of competition with a property where there's multiples, you say to them, look, I have to be super aggressive on contingencies if my buyer's gonna have any shot on this. What is the fastest we can get the appraisal and the loan done here? And they're gonna need your help because you're gonna have to kind of watchdog escrow so the mortgage professional gets what they need in order to meet these deadlines. But you know, I think the shortest I've seen is like 10 for appraisal, maybe 14 for loan. But again, this is not the mortgage professional's performance necessarily. It's the complication of what the loan is going to look like. You know, it's the type of income the borrower has. It's a lot of factors, and that's all up to the mortgage professional. Just, I never want to see you guys have appraisal and loan and have the same time frame. So the most standard for appraisal is 14. The most standard for loan is 17. Okay. Can you do less? That's up to the mortgage professional. It does make your offer more attractive. Sometimes, even with a loan and an appraisal, I might waive a loan contingency or an appraisal contingency. Meaning if it doesn't appraise or the buyer doesn't get the loan, the buyer doesn't have cancellation protection. I don't usually do both. This is only when I'm in a super competitive situation. So I might talk to my mortgage professional and they're like, your buyers are way underbuying. They could qualify for a loan 5 times the dollar amount. They're both W-2 employees, super easy to qualify income, slam dunk, you can lift the loan contingency. I can get them a loan at any bank in any town or all over town. So I'll lift that loan contingency, which makes my offer look stronger. But I don't do these things unless I need to. The appraisal, that's iffy because some appraisers are great at their job. Some know how to play ball. Some are not. You never know what's going to come in. Even if it's a slam dunk in your professional opinion that something is worth this, you don't know what the appraisal is going to come in at. If I have to lift an appraisal contingency, I will not lift the loan contingency. Or if I have to do both, and you'll very rarely do this. Stuff like this happens in like the market we had in the pandemic where there are 15, 20 offers on everything. I will just ride the mortgage professional to get the appraisal done during my investigation contingency so I can cancel under my investigation contingency if the property doesn't appraise. Every once in a while, I'll teach a class on this. I probably won't teach one for a while, but if you go back to my YouTube library, I do teach a whole class on how to get your buyer offer accepted in multiples. I go into basics, psychology of it, how to even order the documents in your offer, the way you present it, but also into the weight and the risks of any of the methods that I use, who you need to talk to, how you need to explain the risk to your buyer, and what you as the real estate professional need to do to protect them under other things. So I definitely watch that class if you ever want to start thinking about doing stuff like this, but we're not really in that market right now. So this should not be a very common thing for you to do. You know, this is like there are 10 other offers type of deal. All right.
So what is the minimum appraisal? How do you know the price?
The property needs to appraise for the purchase price.
Right.
If not, you can cancel escrow if you have an appraisal contingency. The buyer and seller can agree to reduce the purchase price, or the buyer can come in with a difference between the appraised value and the purchase price, or a combination of the last two. Okay. I'm going to just finish through L8, and then I'm going to stop there, and we'll actually, you know what? I'm going to stop at L3, and then we'll continue on part 2. All right. Appraisal contingent, sorry. I'm not going to go through L2 appraisal this line. That's a little bit advanced and kind of complicated, and I'll cover it. If you want to learn about that kind of stuff, you can take that how to get your buyer offer accepted in multiples course. L3, investigation of property. All right, so I have another pet peeve here. There's a contingency called investigation contingency. Agents erroneously call it physical contingency all the time. If I get a counter that says physical, I let them say physical. I don't correct them. Why? Well, if this is the investigation contingency, my hand, physical is just one finger on the hand. So they're just trying to shorten or alter one finger. It does not modify what I've written under investigation contingency. They've incorrectly countered me, and great, because if I need to pull a fast one, if my buyer needs more time, I contractually have it. I'm right because they didn't read, because they didn't call it the right contingency, right? So if you want to learn about all the little fingers on the, or the branches on the tree of the investigation contingency, look at a contingency removal form. It will say investigation contingency, and then you'll have all these boxes. You can either list the whole thing or just portions of it, okay? And this is very important. So take a look at contingency removal form, take a look at investigation contingency and all of the fingers of that hand of contingency. Investigation means everything from looking at permits, looking at the preliminary title report, making sure the buyer can get insurance, reading seller disclosures, the physical portion, which is what? Inspections, right? So investigation of property. Well, it is pretty standard to be 7 to 14 days. 17 is very long. Let me tell you how I decide how many days. So it generally depends on how many inspections I need, okay? So if it's a condo with a common area, I probably really only need a general inspection, right? Termites, usually common area stuff, so I probably don't need a termite inspection. That's up to the buyer, of course. Fireplaces in condos, well, even if there is something wrong, it's not typically something we can fix because they're usually stacked. So again, my buyer can have it, but not usually. I need more time if I need more inspections. However, if I have a massive house, I'm going to need longer because I need several types of inspectors. And when I go into my inspections and negotiations class, I'll tell you about all of the ones I want for a single family residence. Now, if I am inspecting something like a massive estate, like in Hidden Hills, I might need 17 days. But for a condo, I'm typically 7 to 10 days. For a single family, I'm typically 10 to 14 days. And I can get my inspections done in a couple of days. What I need that extra time for is if my initial inspectors say I need secondary inspections. I don't bring the whole circus in usually initially, okay? Or like I just closed the Beverly Hills Flats house. It was in horrible condition. You could smell the mold, this and that. Horrible. Don't worry, it's on the best street. They're fine. And I got a credit. And that's what I was after. But I needed a roof, which I typically wouldn't get unless my general inspector says I need it. I needed a mold inspection. Again, I wouldn't hire a mold inspector unless the general inspector said, hey, there's evidence of past moisture damage in a lot of these areas, or there's elevated moisture here or that, right? So I need that time for secondary inspections. So we'll talk more about that in inspection and negotiations class. Informational access to the property. People don't usually counter or change this. So no matter what your investigation contingency timeframe is, technically, unless this is altered, your buyer has access to go into the property for any reason, even if they've lifted all of their contingencies for 17 days or whatever it's been modified to in this or any subsequent counter, okay? So yeah, if the seller and listing agent are trying to block access because they're just sick of you being in their house, oh well, we can go back if we want to. All right, so I'm going to stop there at L3, investigation of property and informational access to property. And we will continue on Wednesday at 11 a.m. next week at review of seller documents. All right, if you didn't do your homework, please read the residential purchase agreement before you come back to part 2. Please write down any questions that you have. And if you are comfortable enough after you take part 2, go to your mentor and write a practice RPA, having your mentor pretend they're the buyer. All right, if you haven't signed in and you're in the mentorship program, please sign into the class. If you're on Zoom, I auto capture your attendance. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
You're welcome. Any questions at home? Hi.
Oh, no worries.
Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
Kristen.
You're welcome.